Welcome, everyone, to the Maestros of Video Game panel at PAX West 2021. It's so exciting to be here. I'm Emily Reese, and I host a podcast called Level with Emily, where I interview people who make audio and video games, primarily composers for video games. And today we have 5 fantastic composers that I'm so excited to see face-to-face, sort of. We've got Brian D'Oliveira from Resident Evil Village and Sackboy, and another very exciting project coming up that hopefully maybe we can mention, probably not though. We have Roget II, Wilbert Roget II. He wrote music for you've done Call of Duty games and also Mortal Kombat 11, which is amazing with the recent expansion called Aftermath. Jason Graves. Hello to Jason. You're the composer for the Dark Pictures Anthology. There are 2 of those out currently. And you're also scoring a couple of upcoming VR games, Lone Echo 2 and Moss 2, which just got announced. Gareth Coker from Ori and All the Things. And also Immortals Fenyx Rising, which I've been playing lately. Ark, Genesis 2, and the upcoming Halo Infinite. And last and certainly not least, Mr. Cris Velasco from Carrion, which has just been announced is coming to PlayStation, which is super exciting, and also working on Dauntless. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. It's been just ages since I've seen any of you, even though some of you I've spoken with in the last year. We didn't do video, so it's just nice to see everybody's face. And I'm really pleased to be doing this with you all. And, you know, you're all composers that are accustomed to kind of working on your own. So it's pretty obvious that a lot of your workflow probably didn't change too much, or your day-to-day, but, you know, I'm just kind of curious how you've been and what you've been up to since everything's gotten so as the way it is now. So I don't know. Will, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's honestly, the whole pandemic didn't really slow things down at all. If anything, it's accelerated quite a bit. I know that there's a lot of content being made right now, and I'm very fortunate to be working on a lot of it, which I'm very grateful for. I'm wrapping up anew The Distant Light, which is an indie Metroidvania that I've been chipping away at the last several years. And I also just finished season 5 of Call of Duty Mobile. And then unfortunately, at the time of this recording, I can't speak about any of the other projects that I'm working on, which is kind of a bummer, but it's a lot of very exciting stuff. And I'm dipping into some new kind of horizons for my musical style with a lot more musical sound design and use of synthesis. So I'm very excited to announce that once we're, at that point.
Yeah. Cris, how about you? Since I see you taking a big drink of water, what have you been up to? How have you been?
Yeah, under the circumstances, pretty well. Just like Will was saying, the pandemic has not seemed to affect the game industry. If anything, after kind of an initial hiccup, it's been booming, and it's been business as usual. Really, I did move, so I'm in my new studio now, and yeah, I think the only difference for me is I never left my house and studio before, and I'm still not, except it's different when someone says you can't, then suddenly you're like, I gotta get out of here. Yeah. Where are you gonna go? I don't know, nowhere. But
yeah, so Will, you moved. Cris, you moved. I moved. Did any of the others of you move? Jason moved. Jason, how have you been? What's new with you?
There seems to be a theme. But the game industry, I think, is the one industry that took an uptick in popularity when movie and TV, literally shut down for months. I thought that I had a pause in work and moved out of my studio because I'm building a new one. This was a year and a half ago. So I'm coming to you from my master bedroom. I'm just in the corner. It was supposed to be for like 2 months because we were going to build a studio, and then COVID hit and everything got put on hold with like construction and trying to find materials and all that stuff. So a year and a half later, work like tripled, and I've been doing it all from my bedroom, which is totally fine. And the studio's like a month from being finished, so I'm gonna move again, probably in September. Yay!
I think that's probably good news. So congratulations on that.
Definitely.
Yeah, and Brian, tell us how you've been, what you've been up to.
Yeah, I've been lucky because I do happen to have a pretty big studio. We have like 5,000 square feet. So me and my sort of small team, it was our refuge, and we managed to keep sanity between all of us, just keeping busy. And yeah, we, like everybody, like all you guys, we were busier than ever, and it was kind of like a Zen training. It's like, okay, we can leave the house, we're going there, we do our thing, leave. But it's worked out really well. I managed to also not only do the usual projects, but I started a whole new sort of side thing where I'm creating my own virtual instruments, but they're their own thing. So it's been busier than ever, as everybody.
Yep.
Yeah.
Common theme. I love that.
It's a great one.
Yeah, it is. Well, Brian, let's just Gareth.
It's all good. I can actually give you an alternate answer though. So the day Ori and the Will of the Wisps came out was pretty much the day everything shut down. Like it came out March the 11th of last year. And purely on a largely selfish and personal level, the shutdown could not have happened at a better time because I needed the time off, like after finishing that game. So I basically had a month to like 6 weeks to myself because there was an adjustment period. I know everyone got busy, including myself, with games, but I think we're probably all in sync in saying there was an adjustment period while all of the respective companies that we work for transitioned to work from home. And then it was like, all right, back to work, everyone. And we need music more than ever now because everyone's at home playing video games because there's not much else we can do. But I was personally appreciative of like being able to take like 4 to 6 weeks off. Because also in the prior 6 months, I was working on Immortals. We had a first Halo recording session. There was an Arc expansion coming out, and it was just like a lot of things coalescing at the same time. So yeah, a little break is always nice, but now it's like got to keep pumping out the content.
Yeah, and it really has been amazing to, I think, for a lot of gamers, kind of have our dreams kind of come true a little bit in being told to stay home. I mean, I don't mean for it to sound so, glib like that, but it's, we played a lot of games last year, that's for sure. Brian, I want to go back to you and ask you about Resident Evil Village. You all know by now, I can't play scary games. I always want to. And I have played some Resident Evil. I played the fourth one quite a bit, but man, they're getting so scary. And you wrote such a beautiful song for Resident Evil Village with a really great story. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, that kind of came as a surprise. When I got the briefing, they had something in mind and they'd given me references. And, just like a couple weeks ago, before I got such, I was geeking out, looking at random, Indonesian music and instruments. And I found this, bamboo zither that's called a sasando, and I was like trying to find people that play it, and could I buy one? And then I found this one girl that just she was from Poland but had gone and lived there, and she was playing it, and with this really beautiful but eerie kind of voice, but beautiful. And I was like, man, okay, I gotta find a user. Then I got this message, and then in my head I was like, wait a minute, this is perfection, let's try it. And so I called her up. We did I was given the actual video. I just did it like how I always do, but with lyrics this time, which is kind of nice to do it. And we did basically like a duet between me and her. We did it up, and yeah, it's what you hear now. It was kind of magical how it happened. And with my two assistants, we just went at it for like 2 nights without sleeping. And it worked out. So it's been great.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's a really lovely story. And there's a really great video online too that people can see kind of telling that story. Yeah.
Yeah. And nice thing with working with Capcom is that they're super open to experimentation. So, I mean, I threw the quite a few crazy things in there, and you know, we were just experimenting with all kinds of sounds, and they not only liked it, but they wanted more of it. So we just kept on going at it, and then just found that perfect mix of where it was still catchy as a song because it still needed to have that vibe, but still has that, you know, distinct sort of, you know, Resident Evil sound in whatever you want to call that, what it is, you know.
Sure.
So yeah.
So Gareth, you have been working on Halo Infinite, which that's just such a cool musical world, Halo. I mean, it can't really be overstated how awesome that whole music situation is. Marty O'Donnell going all the way back, and you know, what kind of defines that world for you, the Halo world? What are some of those elements that you kind of think of when you think of a Halo score that you wanted to make sure you maintained even while making your own sound?
It's funny, I remember when I initially started on it, there's three composers for Halo Infinite. It's myself, Joel Korolitz, and Curtis Schweitzer. And I remember when we all started at slightly different times, but it's like we all went through the same process of studying what makes Halo music. And that's not really an easy question to answer on the surface. And so it's like, well, let's just go back and play the games. Oh no, my life is so hard. Let's play some more games. And there's all the stuff on a musical level. There's the themes, which we refer to as like the Star Wars-esque themes, because you have to have them. Otherwise the fans will riot.
Yes.
But then for me, it's a little bit beyond that. It's like, you know, how does the music make you feel during the gameplay? Because I mean, I think several people here have scored action games of some kind, whether it's third person or first person. There's a lot of different flavors, and Halo is a very unique flavor. And actually, the thing I noticed the most is that the music has a lot of space in it. And I don't mean sci-fi space. I mean like actual space, like in between the notes. It's not super over the top like you might expect a big epic action game to be. It's actually quite measured, and that is reflective of Master Chief's character, I think. It's very deliberate and precise. I always like to make the comparison with Doom, and it's like another first-person shooter, but it feels completely different when you play the game, and the music also reflects that. So I use that comparison just because it's so like the opposite. And I found that once I knew the basic language, I likened it to learning a language. Normally, I'm in the business of creating an IP, Ori, Ark, Immortals. This was really my first time going into a world which someone else has created and other composers have built upon over the years. And I'm like, I really need to spend time like learning this language. And only then, once I feel like I'm reasonably fluent in it, can I like have the confidence to actually do my own thing on it. And thankfully, I think what we've ended up with is an interesting, you know, we're definitely acknowledging scores of Halo 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I think the three of us have managed to successfully put our own spin on things. And fortunately, the release of the technical preview a few weeks ago had a bunch of the new music in, and we haven't been raked over the coals by fans yet. So I guess we're doing something right.
That's fantastic. And I want to ask Will kind of the same question, because, you know, you've come into the Mortal Kombat universe and also Call of Duty to a certain extent, but Call of Duty, you know, changes times and settings so often that I think almost, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like Call of Duty might have a little less of a defined sound world than something like Mortal Kombat. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, if I'm wrong, especially, but also just kind of talk about how you follow into those sounds as well.
Yeah, I mean, Mortal Kombat's interesting in that it's obviously had, I don't even know how many games, 20 something games so far. And then of course the movies and the new movie now. But it has a spirit to it that's pretty consistent. And I feel so lucky that I got to work on Mortal Kombat because it was my life, like my whole life in middle school. And I grew up with these characters, and now I get to score for them, which was incredible.
Wasn't it one of the first games that you played?
It literally was. I remember like this. I remember it was my classmate Ollie's 7th grade birthday party at the arcade, and his extremely Polish dad just hands me a bunch of quarters and is just like, play video game. And so I saw Mortal Kombat arcade, and I just sat there and ignored the party and just played this game the whole time. It was incredible. But yeah, it's interesting. There is a Mortal Kombat sound. I think the obvious answer is violence. You have to portray violence in some way, and that special Mortal Kombat violence that's just so over the top that it goes from scary to disgusting to hilarious within the space of one fatality. And violence can be portrayed musically in a bunch of different ways. I think the obvious way is through rhythm, but in my score, I actually tried to do it through harmony, especially. There's certain harmonies that I just found really innately suggest the violence and ruthlessness that the game needed. Mortal Kombat 11 is kind of interesting, though, in that it has a very in-depth storyline. There's very detailed and very dynamic characters. And so I also wrote leitmotifs for every single character.
Wow.
Leitmotifs are kind of like musical calling cards, if you don't know. They're like little themes, I guess. And also for concept like family and the relationships between characters, and of course the combat theme, which exemplified all that violence that I mentioned. And this allowed me to score I think 4 hours of cutscenes with a level of depth and relatability that was really needed to take this epic storyline, but also make it personal. And lastly, I mean, Mortal Kombat also, because it's got so many different diverse characters from literally everywhere around the world and different universes and so on. So having a wide variety of instrumentation was very important to me. I had the orchestra as well as big kind of Wagnerian choir and organ, even church organ. But it also featured lots of solo world instruments from, I think I had 4 continents represented by all of the soloists and vocalists that I had performing on the score. And then of course, a lot of like very gritty synthesizer use, again, kind of portraying all of that violence.
Sure. Cris, I want to ask you about how you dealt with combat music. I mean, all 5 of you have written countless hours and hours upon hours, I'm sure, of combat music. And, I think it's people who know about game audio know that combat has various stages and the music intensity ramps up. And how do you make that happen? And Cris, I feel like for Dauntless, you've done kind of an interesting spin on changing those levels of intensity. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I am so tired all the time from writing combat music for the last 15 years or whatever. When I start up a new project and I see the music document and I see how much is combat, my soul leaves my body for a minute.
No. Just for a minute.
Just for a minute. But yeah, between the 5 of us, oh my God, how much combat music is there? It's insane. And you always think like, how can I do it again and make it sound at all different from the last 500 ones that I did? And so yeah, Dauntless is interesting because I started on that game like 6 years ago, maybe even longer than that, 6-7 years ago. And so my pitch for that became the main theme for the game, which I actually just rewrote and re-recorded recently, because the game has really taken on a life of its own since then. But yeah, with Dauntless, we started out using the hand pan with a lot of found percussion and stuff, and we were trying to make the score sound different than the typical kind of fantasy, kind of just over the top, big, epic orchestral action. And so, but the game has changed so much over the years that it has, partly due to like an outcry of fans even, we've switched from like hand pan and, me just beating on random stuff and playing, strings weird, and to everyone being like, no, we want, like, give us the themes, give us the this and that. And so, yeah, now it's kind of straightforward action adventure. And I write a theme for each new behemoth in the game that you have to fight. But yeah, it's not super interactive, but as you're fighting these creatures, they just kind of go from normal combat, and then if you piss them off, they get enraged, and then if you piss them off even more, they go in this thing called aether states, and so the music changes for that. And the way I found that worked best is to just change the key and change the meter. And that, I mean, of course, it's a brand new piece, but just having something subtle like that combines kind of perfectly with the preceding track seems to kind of mix it up enough in Dauntless that it feels like the music is following the action.
And did you feel like that made it more enjoyable? I mean, I know that you enjoy writing music no matter what, but did it make it a more enjoyable process to deal with it in that way?
Yeah, and the bulk of the Behemoth music has been written over all these years. I'm still, it's kind of a live game, so it gets an update every month or every couple months. So I'm constantly writing music for it.
Nice.
Yeah, it's I only have maybe 3 to 4 behemoths a year to write for, so that's enough space where you can kind of like calm down and be like, okay, I got this.
That's great. Jason, you're gonna be the one we talk to about VR today, because VR, 3D audio has existed long before VR was a thing, and a lot of people misunderstand that concept. So, there's some debate as to how much a composer's job really changes with VR, but there are really great examples of how it has to. So, Jason, I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on writing music, since you've got Moss 2 that was just announced and Lone Echo 2, both being VR projects.
Well, first of all, I love both of these games because they're so different from each other.
Yeah.
And it's literally, Moss is like a tiny mouse in a forest with little creatures, and Lone Echo is a woman and a sentient AI android in space, like around a moon in Jupiter or something. I mean, they couldn't be further apart from each other. I've been doing VR since I think Oculus first launched. I worked on the the free starter kit that came with all of the things. With the audio director was just someone I knew at Facebook. So it was like literally the preview that even game developers would have if guests came to the studio. This was back, I mean, probably 4 years ago, when maybe even more than that, when there were 10 of these in the world. And it was very, very fledgling, and no one really knew what to do. And I think there was a lot of like, we could do this and we could do this and we could do this, and a lot of experimentation. And what I came down to, the final sort of reasoning, along with most of my audio directors, is there's some really neat stuff you can do with spatial audio, with diegetic music, which is a fancy word for saying music that occurs in the game, like maybe a radio that's playing, or a broadcast system like outside your house in the video game. You can do some really interesting spatial things by positioning the audio. So when you're in VR, and I'm not going to turn my head, but when you're looking around and you're looking up and down, the audio is pinpointed in that 3D space with your 3D visuals. With the music, it tends to get a little distracting, just because most of the time, and I think all of us would agree, probably 99% of our work is writing underscore. So we're there to support the game, and we're there to embellish the emotions, and we're there to like really make it a unique experience for the players. And even if it's featured, it's not really called attention like on screen. You're not running by like the recording studio with the orchestra there. So usually treating it as if it were non-VR in terms of music is the most straightforward way to go, because also your audio team is doing all this other crazy stuff with all the other audio, and there's interactive this and spatial audio that and 3D immersion with this, and it's crazy how much stuff you can do now in any game, but especially in VR. So usually I'm just focused on my normal thing, which is what's special about this game? What can I do that makes this music completely unique? And for the case of Lone Echo 2, I just did all synthesizers, which is the same thing I did for Lone Echo 1. But this time I literally pulled out every synth that I had. I had like 22 synthesizers and drum machines. And Maluka, of course, singing because of the solo female vocal, sort of with the one female protagonist in the game. So that had its very special, unique kind of sound. And then Moss is all live solo instruments. Me and basically 4 friends of mine from all over the world. And we've talked about how lockdown didn't affect us too much. All my players were already at home. And as a matter of fact, the cello player that I got, who has toured with Bjork, by the way,
What?
Emily, I know you're a huge fan, right? He's amazing.
That's awesome.
I found him because he, like many other musicians, didn't have work because all the orchestras had to shut down back in March of last year. And if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have discovered him. And he's an amazing cello player. I feature him a lot in the scores. So it's all about the unique emotional resonance that the music can kind of have an effect on for the listener and the player. And if we can do fancy VR tricks, great, but it's usually kind of kept to a minimum.
Now you mentioned playing live instruments, and I know that all of you play. And I kind of have 2 questions. Do any of you sit at a piano and write when you're writing melodic music? Does anybody do that? Jason does a little bit. Yeah. I mean, it's so old
An actual
school.
piano?
Guitar.
Yeah, like a real, well, or a keyboard, I guess. But yeah. I mean, I guess you would all use keyboards as you're writing if you're doing synth stuff. But what I mostly want to know is, you all are well versed in numerous instruments, and you can record yourselves and you can sound good and all of those things. And do you think it's kind of safe to say that you, in this day and age, kind of need to be able to do all of those things to be a successful game composer?
I don't like to say.
Are you asking me or are you asking everybody?
Everyone.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't like to say that you need to do this, that, or the other. I mean,
Fair
I know
enough.
some folks who are absolutely brilliant synthesists and extremely in demand, but they don't, necessarily play anything. But it's such a great way of developing a unique sound to your own. I mean, I personally grew up on classical piano, and then in high school, I got so into, the classic Japanese role-playing games like Final Fantasy and Chrono Cross. And so I decided I'm going to teach myself how to play the flute, because that was like the instrument at the time. And it's added so much to my own music, being able to play these things on my own that are just coming from the heart and not necessarily anything that you can write down and transcribe and give to someone else to play, but instead you're doing it yourself. I mean, I'd love to hear from Brian and Jason, because Brian, I know you have your whole La Hacienda studio that has like a million different instruments all like around the world. Yeah, Jason, not to embarrass him, but he created instruments for its Tomb Raider score as well. That whole big metal art piece. I mean, I'd love to hear more about those.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. How about you?
I guess, yeah. For me, it started with, like, okay, I'm not going to wait for an orchestra to play my music, so I'm just going to do it myself and figure it out. I got called on it a few times. People thought I was crazy when I started filing out the instruments. I even had an intervention at a certain point. It was pretty funny, actually. Like, no, you have to stop. You're doing too much. 10 years later, it's even bigger and better.
Yeah.
So it's worked out really well for me. I find that it's funny because I like to tell the story, but it really was kind of a turning point. About 10 years ago, I went to the Amazon and did ayahuasca. And when I came back, I realized, or during that time, I was like, there's no limitation. This idea that you have to be good at only one instrument, which is kind of ingrained in us as, from a young age, you're good at that. And if you do too much other stuff, you're not going to be good. It's just like speaking languages. They used to think that you're not as smart if you spoke many languages back in the days. It's it's crazy. It's the total opposite. And I find that also it's the same with music and with instruments. It's just like language. The more you play them, the more better you become at all of them. And then just yourself as a composer, as a musician, you're able to express yourself in these different languages that these instruments allow you to speak in. You know, you can go more fluid, or you can go more, you know, in a different, completely angular way, depending on how the instrument allows you to express that. So that's what I love about it. And I use the instruments as kind of like the conduits to that way of writing and expressing.
Yeah.
So it's been working for me really well. At the same time, I'm trying not to get stuck in that. Like, you know, lately I've been making electronic music again, and I'm just sitting there tweaking and I'm, you know, programming stuff. And I just wanted, like, it's always just about switching it up and you know, never getting too stuck in one way or train of thought, because then, you know, it's just like anything. You get lazy, then you don't have any creativity after a while. But if you switch it up and you within certain limitations, it keeps it fresh and it's enjoyable.
Yeah, Jason, how about you? I know Will kind of called you out a little bit there. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm a drummer and a classically trained percussionist. So basically the world is my instrument. Ever since I had my first microphone and accidentally recorded myself hitting the desk, and the microphone had a delay and a reverb on it, kind of like Brian's Amazon realization, I thought, oh my gosh, I could play anything if I have a microphone or a cell phone and record it. And a lot of times I write music differently depending on what instrument I'm on. If I'm on the piano, I'm writing one way and voicing things one way. If I'm playing guitar, I'm doing something different. I kind of grew up playing guitar and keyboards and bass and drums and percussion. So that really translates to most of like the band instruments, like in terms of kind of the root ensemble of things. And I'll rub two rocks together for Far Cry Primal and stir a bucket of dirt, like in a heartbeat, because it's something different. I'm like very OCD with sounds, and I love learning new things. So you combine all that and shake it up in my brain, and that's me just running around trying to find new sounds for every game, like inspired by the game, and then the sounds inspire me. That's how I like to work.
Yeah, I did actually something super similar, Jason, for Carrion. You know, the creature's this blob, this never-ending eating machine, and I wanted a unique sound for that, and so I made myself a whole library of slime. I just recorded a $2 store-bought piece of slime that at the time, like, kids were really into slime, and my good friend, his kids were like, oh, look at what I made, it's slime. And it's like, oh my god, that's the sound of Carrion. And we spent just an afternoon like taking this squishy slime and doing rhythms with it and just throwing it against things and just, squish. And like half that score is my Contact slime library.
It was like slime
Awesome.
was your muse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to be contrarian again.
Please.
I'm clearly going to be the contrarian today, because I do like performing, but my thing is, I'm like, well, someone else can probably do this better than me. And the chances are I probably know someone who can do it better than me. Like, I feel like it's good to have a knowledge of all the instruments, but then when I send it off to someone else and get it back the way they've played it, and years and years of training behind it, I have found one of the benefits of the pandemic is I had a chance to like self-evaluate, which is very rare. And I look back at the pieces of music that, first of all, resonate with the public the most, but second of all, that I enjoy the most. There's a common theme there, and I feel like the best music that I've produced has always been born out of a collaboration with someone else initially, because it can be very helpful to bounce ideas off other musicians. I'm not really talking about the compositional aspect, but there is a performative aspect to music as well, which, if you're not really well versed in an instrument, that both has a benefit, which I think is what Jason and Brian are touching on, because you can learn stuff and create sounds that like no trained musician might have come up with, because like, well, why would I play the instrument like that? But that's something I sometimes ask like trained musicians to do as well. I'm like, yep, forget everything you learned, and try and do something different, but also show me something, like play this like the most professional way possible. And that's borne fruit some incredible collaborations over the years. So what I like to do now, and I have the benefit of being on a project that is like 4 to 5 years out. I've been brought on pre-production, which is really unusual, especially in AAA world. And I get to experiment and try things out. And I feel like I'm basically a casting director at this point, because I can really like work hard to find specific performers that do things really well. And then all I have to do is convince the game dev company that, yeah, we should bring them on for like the full game as well. But like, so I just bring that up because I just wanted to be alternative. But I'm really not a hipster. So, okay.
Well, Gareth, if you ever need a slime guy, I got you.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, hearing and seeing about Brian's like masses of instruments, I feel like it's inevitable that one day I'm going to end up calling Brian and be like, yes, can you play some stuff for me? Because that's the thing. Even within the composer community, there's a bunch of really, really, very, very, very capable musicians. So I'm just lucky that we have all these resources and we kind of get to play with them in different ways.
I mean, I think it's fascinating, like to watch Brian, because what would you say was your first instrument, Brian? It
was the flute, actually.
The flute.
Yeah.
So
a little tiny Andean flute that actually I had, like, it was given and then it broke, so I had to like make myself another one.
Oh no. Oh, no. Then you'll pick up a cello and you'll just like have the most beautiful cello sound. I'm like, I grew up, my sister played cello. She still has her cello. I've been a musician my whole life. I can pick up a cello and sound like absolute garbage. So even though I had strings technique class, I can't get a good sound on the cello. So, I mean, that's one of the things that amazes me, where I'm like, I totally see what Gareth is saying, because there's no possible way that I can get, you know, if the desired result is a good sound on the cello, I'm not your guy. But if you want something wacky, I can handle it. But, you know,
to take that to a further level, there's more than one way to play the cello, and different performers bring their own attitude and feel to it. And you know, you can start to hear the differences between them, and like, you know, one cellist doesn't always necessarily fit every single project, even though you could probably, like, a professional musician can probably tailor the performance, but you know, some people just have a sound, and a lot of it's to do with the instrument as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the instruments with the way that who you've learned from, the style. Like for myself, I started playing Baroque cello, and then I shifted to Indian, and then I did classical. So it like whole other journey. So when I play, I think of it, you know, very differently, very fluidly. I don't use a lot of vibrato on purpose, even though now I can. But it's, you know, there's a very specific way or voice that I've, you know, played cello.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, yeah, the cello's crazy, you know, good example, because it is probably one of the hardest instruments. You know, I had to like wake up at 5 a.m. and practice for a few hours before I go in the studio for like quite a few years before I got to an okay level.
Yeah, and I suppose if I practiced.
Brian.
Go ahead, Cris.
Oh, Brian, I'm curious, because this feels like something you would have. Do you have one of these guys in the studio? It's a Kangling.
Which one is that?
It's called a Kangling.
I don't have one of those.
Oh no!
Oh man! It's made from a femur.
Whoa!
Brian, I'm amazed you don't have one of those.
Yeah, I've actually never played it. I'm pretty sure it's haunted, and
really,
I don't know.
Okay.
I just feel weird about putting my mouth on that thing. Like, it's someone's bone. But I figured, man, you of everyone you probably had like, oh yeah, I've got my Kangling drawer with like 20 of them.
I do have my bone instruments, but they tend to break actually after a few years. So like the donkey jaws and all that stuff, you know, you hit them and then they, you know, after a while they just decompose. So yeah, so they're fun.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm just trying to make actually like cast instruments that have the same kind of vibe, but you know, they're going to last longer and it's not so weird. You're not playing a piece of dead matter.
We were, I think Brian, actually you were mentioning, you know, just like mixing it up and trying to do something different and not get in this rut, kind of putting words in your mouth. But, you know, all of you are generally juggling at least more than one project at a time. So I'd love to hear you each kind of talk about what that's like, what you enjoy about, if you're doing like a horror game next to a kid's game, or like Jason was talking about doing Lone Echo in space compared to Moss in the forest. What's that like? Is it difficult for you to switch gears, or do you revel in it? We'll go ahead and start.
Sure. Yeah. Honestly, I love it. I mean, I did Mortal Kombat and Vader Immortal at the exact same time. In fact, they had the same deadline, like the same day. It was kind of ridiculous. And it was
Vader Immortal Kombat.
Yeah, yeah. And it was kind of, by the way, I think I've worked with I share both those franchises with Cris Velasco. I'm pretty sure. Because didn't you also do like Mortal Kombat 9? And then Cris did the later seasons of or chapter or whatever they call it of Vader Immortal. But yeah, it was kind of great because I think maybe Monday to Friday I would be working on Mortal Kombat and just chipping away at that. It's a much larger score. It's like 2 hours and some change. But then Vader Immortal I would work on the weekends. And it was just so great to kind of like shift gears, like Vader Immortal was a Star Wars score. So it was mostly orchestral in nature and a different sort of harmony. And it was like a relief. It was just this like nice, pleasant orchestration, like just take a little break from the harsh violence and just like beating over the head with music that Mortal Kombat needed. So it really kept my writing fresh, I think, on both projects.
How about you, Gareth? I know that you have gone back and forth many a time. What do you think about that process?
I found my limit, I think, at the end of 2019 and 2020. I think juggling two is fine because you can kind of play one off the other. Even when the deadlines are the same, it's generally manageable. When it starts to become three, and here's the thing, projects get delayed all the time, especially recently with the pandemic. And so your perfectly planned schedule gets destroyed. So there was one point in September, I'll give you the brief timeline. September 2019, I'm recording in Bulgaria and Nashville for Darksiders Genesis. And then in December, we had first recording in London for Ori 2. Later in December, we had first recording for Halo. And then January, we had the second recording for Ori 2. And then all of that stuff has to be mixed. Oh, and I think I'm doing one of the Arc expansion packs, and I'm just like, how am I going to get this all done? And it did get done, but I found my limit basically. And it's fun to play stuff off one another, but I think one of the battles we all face as freelancers is the managing of the schedule and also leaving enough breathing room for the inevitable delays. I simply just assume every project I work on now is going to be delayed by like 4 to 6 months. And thus it's a pleasant surprise if it doesn't, because then if it doesn't, hey, I've got 4 months free. So that's kind of how I approach it. I do enjoy it. But I think there is a limit for all of us, but probably all of us have different limits.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that, I think a lot of people learned last year that you guys had a huge head start on is trying to get a head start on balancing your time, workspace. I started working from home, doing a morning radio show from my living room. I did that for more than a year. And that was an adjustment for me to do that all at home and then try and figure out, when am I done for the day? When is it okay to answer an email now? Those kinds of things. And am I going to be working on the weekends? And Will, you mentioned that you did one game Monday through Friday and the other game on the weekend. How are you guys at that? I mean, has that been something you've grown into being good at, or that you constantly struggle with?
I actually find that if I'm just working on one project, that it almost feels like I'm not working at all. Like it's almost too easy. And if I find myself being able to take weekends off, just like I almost start panicking, like, oh my God, I have to get a job. But it's really weird. And I unfortunately cannot talk about any of them, but I think this might be my craziest period ever. I'm writing on 6 projects at once right now, and
Man.
and I think that helps us actually level up as composers. Just doing so many different styles and getting to do something different every day. And whoops,
Come back.
My battery is like, I'm running out. Yeah, for me, it really makes me a better composer, actually. But I think the trickiest part is not just burning out, but also making sure all of your clients feel like they're number one. Because you don't want to ever go to somebody and miss a deadline and be like, oh, I'm sorry, it's because I was working on this other thing. Like that's complete bullshit. Like, you've got to really, if you can't schedule yourself to be able to take on that amount of work, just don't even try, because you're going to start burning bridges, and that's not good for you or them or anyone.
Cris just touched exactly on what I was talking about. It's like, I found my limit, and Cris has clearly a different limit, but having been through that process, I now know kind of like the type of work I want to do as well. Like I know I'm much better suited for these long-term projects which bring me on early, but not every developer is willing to do that. But getting that kind of flexibility kind of gives me the space to do things over a longer period of time, because I did have that period where it was like, right, you're on the project and we need 2 hours of music. You've got like 6 months, have fun. And so there's like so many different timelines that can end up happening in video game music as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. There's actually 2 schools of thought about time management that I've heard. I mean, for starters, we all set our own hours basically, because we're freelance musicians. And some people will say, no, I work from 9 to 5 and I put all of my efforts then, and then I take a break, and then I go home, I have my family, and so on.
I know
other
Jason's
people are
good at that.
Exactly, yeah. Actually, not to embarrass Jason yet again, but he and I think Jack Wall gave an amazing GDC talk a couple years ago about time management on this exact subject. I'm not sure if it's in the vault or if you can get it for free, but it's definitely worth
it. Should be
checking
on
out.
YouTube.
Yeah, it was fantastic. In my case, I just find that I'm a lot more comfortable and relaxed if I just take breaks when I need them. I'm a big napper, and I just say like, hey, look, my brain is not functioning at full capacity, so I'm just going to walk away. And so it's almost like I take like little weekends like throughout the week as I need them. And I don't draw that distinction, which is great, because on the weekends, the actual weekends, I have all the time in the world to not have to deal with like emails coming in and distractions or like construction next door or anything like that. So it's everyone kind of finding their own balance, I think. I think everyone's mind works differently in this regard.
Well, and Jason, I mean, you've got, obviously a family, not that you're the only one on the panel with a family, but you've got a family, you've got a farm, like an entire, like when you described Moss, about the little mouse in a forest with little tiny animals, I thought a miniature Jason Graves in like North Carolina running around the farm. So, I realize you can't give us your entire GDC talk as we're running out of time, but I do want to know, like, what are some of your key kind of thoughts on how to balance your time as a freelance composer?
Well, like Will said, I think everyone works differently. And I realized about when I turned 30 that I would hit that kind of ceiling of creativity. I think all of us would agree. Actually, I'm curious. I know we're running out of time. I'm sorry. But the way I work, like I'm working on some music, right? You're getting something started, you hear something in your head, and that kind of makes you think of something else, which makes you think of something else. And when I'm tired, it's like static. It's radio silence. And not only that, whatever I just put into the computer, either recording or with MIDI, sounds really, really dumb to me, like dumber than it normally sounds. So if I have to work on the weekends, I always have to take like the following Monday off. If I have to work late one night, I know I'm not getting that back by like sleeping in the next morning. It just, I guess my brain just works that way. So for me, it's basically, 8 to 6 if I'm crunchy, 9 to 5 if I'm relaxed Monday through Friday. And I can compress or expand the number of minutes I need to write each day, kind of based on how many deadlines I have going. Let's face it, we all want to have a week to write a 2-minute queue, but the reality is usually you got to like knock it out in a day, and then maybe some other queues as well. So it's all about finding that balance for you personally. And I've got a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old daughter, and they've been homeschooled forever. My wife has been living at home.
Good.
Stay-at-home mom. She doesn't work, so we hang out together all the time, and that's kind of my main motivation for taking these breaks and having a structured work schedule. Is I completely decompress with them, watching movies, hanging out, reading comics, watching them play games, whatever. That's how I rejuvenate the creative kind of juice. And then when Monday morning rolls around, I already know exactly what I'm going to write that day, because I had the weekend or that evening before to think about it. And then it's just like scribbling and bibbling, like massaging the MIDI information or playing the instruments and kind of going from there.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many of you have studios at home and you work at home? Do all of you work from home, or do you go somewhere? No, Brian, you go to your studio, right? Yeah, but everybody else, so Will, Gareth, Cris, and Jason, you all have home studios. Yeah. So Brian, how does that affect you? If you're struck by a lightning bolt of creativity at 2 a.m. and you're at home, what do you do?
I drive my girlfriend crazy, and I have to go in a separate room and play something so I can remember it or something.
Yeah. That's great.
I really like the separation, and I've kind of gotten it down, at least because for me it's very physical, and I need to be 100% there, full concentration without any kind of distractions. So I've kind of narrowed it down to my personal magic formula. I get there at 7 or 8 and I hit the ground running. I go at it until 12. I quickly do another 1 or 2 hours, and that's as much as the magic usually I can get out of a day. And then the rest I'll just be editing or cleaning or working on other ideas, but not performing. And I've kind of learned it from I went to India and did a lot of training where you get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, you practice, you get it, and then you do all your work. And that kind of spilled over to this schedule that I have now. And it's worked out really well. But it gets tricky when you got 2 or 3 projects and you still have to deliver, and then you're working into the night again on a second shift. It's actually not too healthy, I find. So I'm personally, actually, I've made a promise for myself that for sort of like in the fall and in the coming months, I'm really going to limit how many projects I do at the same time, and just 1 or 2, and then that's it. Like, doors are closed until we can move on, but make sure that there's like a focus enough that you can have a good work-life balance, which I think is really important.
I'd love to just expound on that a little bit too. Like, so for anybody that's watching this, other composers that may be just starting and thinking like, oh my God, that sounds overwhelming to, and the work-life balance is very important. And we all have, our different markers for what's comfortable and what we like. But I also, so the, excuse me, pandemic started up, and that, like a lot of people, I kind of let a lot of things go, like mentally and physically. And I've just realized now that that's so important when you're in a creative field like this, and you're working from home and you're sitting a lot, and you really have to take care of your mind and body, and or you're going to go absolutely crazy. I mean, I start every morning by just meditating and trying to get into a good space, and then I go for a walk, and that's usually where a lot of my ideas start germinating too, is just out walking, not actively composing, but kind of the subconscious, because kind of like always chipping away at whatever problem. And just take, even though we all work crazy long hours, do just take time for yourself.
Well, that is wonderful advice. And I just am so grateful for all of you and all the music you create. You collectively have hands down written some of my favorite video game music. And I know that you'll write more of my favorite video game music. That's why you all are so gainfully employed. So Brian De Oliveira, Wilbert Roget II, Gareth Coker, Cris Velasco, Jason Graves, thank you all so much for all that you do. And is there anything anybody wants to say before we say goodbye? All right.
Please get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Please.
All right, everyone. Well, be well. Thank you so much. And we'll do this again someday, hopefully in person next time.